I'm here with writer, activist, and founder of the Global Peace Initiative of Women, Dena Merriam, and we're talking about her latest book, When the Bright Moon Rises, The Awakening of Ancient Memories. Welcome, Dena.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I've really been looking forward to talking to you today. I loved the book. It reads like a novel. It covers various times in history from Vedic India 3,000 years ago to different times in China, including the Han and Tang dynasties. But it's primarily an accounting of your memories of a series of your past lives. Could you talk a little bit about how you came to write the book?
Well, this is my third book. I write about my experiences. That's all we can do is write about our experiences. And each time I finish a book, I think, well, what more have I to say? I've said everything I have to say. So I had written my first book, My Journey Through Time, which went back successively several different lifetimes, showing how one life flows into the next, into the next, into the next, things unfinished, get completed. But it's not necessarily linear. Mm-hmm. It's spread out over a wide time period. So things that happened thousands of years ago can be impacting you today. But I didn't really see that in my first book. And then in my second book, went back to ancient India, and I thought I was done. And then I had a serious experience as I was traveling, organizing a gathering in Thailand. And I again was carried back into another time period, going back the first part of the book, which takes place during the Vedic era, which is about 8,000 BCE, not long after the melting of the ice. And I was very struck by this because I work a lot in the area of climate activism. We do a lot of spiritual conferences around the inner dimensions of climate change and what it's going to mean for human society. But actually seeing, now this is known scientifically, 11,000 BCE was when the glaciers began to melt. Mm-hmm. And before that, there was very little rain because the water was locked into the ice. Most of Europe, half of the US was under glaciers. But a meteor hit us and the ice began to melt. And what came from that were all the rivers mm-hmm. and the forests. Mm-hmm. Because the rain came, the ice is melting, the oceans rose 400 feet. Imagine that. We're talking about oceans rising 10 feet from this current situation in this century. The oceans rose 400 feet. Now, we don't know the time period. It could have been hundreds of years. It could have been 1,000 years. Yeah. But lands were submerged. And it's interesting because every culture has the memory of this. Mm-hmm. In the Old Testament, it's Noah, the great flood. They have that in India too. There was a great flood. So this collective memory of this time of the ice melting, but that's when the Saraswati River came into being and the Yellow River came into being in China. The earliest of the civilizations that we have recorded memory of, so to speak. And the rishis were helping to guide the process. Mm-hmm. The forests were beginning to flourish, and forest communities were flourished. So, and humanity was migrations and humanity. So I was very interested in this time period. And then I got to peer into what it was like to live at that time, where there was actually much greater harmony. Mm-hmm. 11,000 BC is in the East, it was called, it was the Satya Yuga, but mm-hmm. the descending Satya Yuga mm-hmm. was the beginning of the descent. Mm-hmm. So, so I reflected on a lot of that. They still had the consciousness of oneness, of unity with everything. Mm-hmm. They were still very connected to the heavens. Mm-hmm. Everything was guided by the movement of the constellations and stars. Mm-hmm. They were very close to, they had an incredible intuitive understanding of all that. But there was a slow loss of knowledge. The more civilization developed, quote, the more there was a loss of the connection, mm-hmm. the interconnection to it all. Mm-hmm. So I wrote that story. Mm-hmm. And then there was a huge passage of millennia, and the story continues 9,000 years later in Tang, China.
Yeah. Well, you've brought up that time period, and we were talking a little bit before we started the interview about the relevance of that melting of the ice then and to the time that we're in now, this time that's a bit more of a time of separation. And but we're going through these climate changes, and you talked about your activism. Can you talk a little bit about the relevance of what we're going through now with climate change, and how your memories of that time affect your perspective now?
So the difference is that it was not human caused at that time.
Right.
It wasn't because of the overconsumption of the planet. I mean, the human population was small at that time, and people lived very simply on the land. In the belt where they could live, if there was a narrow belt where the glaciers were not, where the human population lived. So how we deal with our climate crisis now is to regain something of that simplicity of living in harmony with the earth. A big leap, because we're far from that now. Our lives are very complex. Right. Compared to that time, and we're very divorced. I mean, most people who live in cities, what do they know about the rhythms of the earth, the nature's rhythms? And we're so disconnected from the skies. We can't even see the skies. So we're very disconnected from the universe. So we're very kind of focused on ourselves, and how we move out of that human focus. Even, I've been to so many of these climate change conferences at the UN, and all the discussion is how it's going to affect us. It's not how is it going to affect all of life. Right. It's how it's going to affect us. And so moving out of this excessive self-focus into seeing ourselves as an integrated part of the whole and caring about the whole. How is it going to affect the whole? How is it going to affect the complex ecosystems? Because at the end of the day, that affects us. But not to think of it in that way, to think of it for the sake of life, protecting life. So I think there's a leap in consciousness that we have to make if we are to peacefully move through this shift that we're facing.
How do you see us doing that, making that leap?
I've always said that I think the crisis is a spiritual one, because that is a spiritual process to come into relationship again. That's a spiritual process. I mean, the economists, the political leaders, they can't do it for us. They can tell us we're going to be in trouble if we don't make changes. The earth is going to warm, agriculture is going to suffer. The water is going to be a problem. There are going to be fires. There are going to be strong hurricanes. But these are just the outer symptoms. And so how we make that shift, I think each person has to go through a process of reconnecting with the land, reconnecting with the earth and with the waters and with everything.
Yeah, and with internally within the self, reconnecting to the larger consciousness.
And I think it's an internal process. Right. I mean, the dysfunction we see in the external world is a reflection of an internal dysfunction. And all the violence that we're facing in this country. I mean, it's a reflection of an internal state of mind.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In reading your book, I felt like not only were there teachings within the book, which is worth reading it right there, but I felt there was transmission occurring in the book. And I'm wondering if you were aware of that.
Yes, there was in the first part in India, in Vedic India. And the other thing that I saw was, this is a time when There were no distinctions between different levels of society. There were no castes, no gender differences. There were women rishis. I mean, the women were as prominent. Some of the clans were led by women, some not. It was just, there was no hierarchy,
right,
on any level. So this crept into the human consciousness with the descending times, really. What historians or anthropologists would call the development of human civilization. There was also a decline in spiritual consciousness, where these were equal societies, and everybody found their place according to their interest and their capability. So there was a woman sage at that time who played a very important role for this woman Sundari, whose life I felt that I lived. And she was not ready to understand what the teachings were. She was very sort of simple in her, sincere, but simple in her understanding. She loved the river, the Saraswati River. She loved the sage, but she didn't understand the teachings of the sage. But I came to understand the Vedas through the writing of this book, because the Vedas are very hard, they're inaccessible, because the language is all poetic metaphor. And so, and it was an ancient Sanskrit, not just a different language, Sanskrit, but an ancient form, a very ancient form of that. And so things that they understood, you need to intuitively grasp it. But the rishis were in search of enlightenment, of the luminous mind, what they called. And that luminous mind, they prayed to the power that could give them the luminous mind, which they called Indra. And he was the one to awaken. He was the force that brought the light into the mind, so that they could awaken to the true self. So it's very different from how the tradition then got covered in ritual and superstition over the millennia.
Right.
And then in China, so there was a transmission there. And then much later in China, this sage takes the form of a Taoist master,
right,
and becomes the teacher, my teacher. And I became a Taoist in the writing of this book. I didn't know much about Taoism. I didn't know much about Taoism, and I didn't feel connected to China at all until I wrote this book. And then I was deeply immersed in China, and began thinking like a Taoist, and longing for the sacred mountains to go to China.
Oh, that's fascinating. And there's so much about Taoism and so many, beautiful teachings on Taoism through the writing of the book. How has that changed your perspective on China, the writing of the book?
Well, I saw this. I experienced the spiritual energy of China. And, just like one has to disassociate the political system of America from the heart of the land. Right. And we're a very young culture, a few hundred years old. China is how many thousands of years BCE? Maybe 5,000 BCE. So we're talking about maybe a 7,000-8,000 year old culture, right?
Right.
If you really go back, there's not a lot of physical evidence, but there's the stories, and myths. What they call myths, or the traditions of a culture, are simply the stories told for the population to understand, but there are essential truths in them. So just as India has a very strong relationship with the energies of the sun, with the both the physical sun and the spiritual sun, the illuminating force in the universe. China has this relationship with the goddess of the moon. And so I spent a lot of time sort of immersed in that energy of the goddess of the moon, trying to, you can't, it's one thing to try to understand, you can't understand it rationally. What does that mean, goddess of the moon? Is there a lady sitting up there?
Right.
No. It's not what it means. Right.
Right.
But there's a spiritual energy that comes, and I really tapped into the spiritual essence of China, and I can no longer look at China as a political entity again.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
You know, to me, it's if you go far back, their leaders. There also was a river culture along the Yellow River, but their leaders were sages. Mm-hmm. Way back before 3000 BCE, and they were. It wasn't by hereditary. When one sage got old as an emperor, the sages would gather and they would pick who was the next sage to become the emperor, and to become the leader. I don't even think they called it the emperor, who would kind of guide and be the father of the community. And again, there wasn't this domination of conquest. Right. You know, eventually the empires grew, and over the millennia it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But there were lots of different communities initially who were living peacefully together. Right, right. And you said it changed your perspective on the relationship between India and China. Can you say a little bit about that? Is a very important relationship, India and China. Yeah. Because the energy has definitely moved into Asia. China's better positioned at the moment to really take a lot of leadership in the world, and is doing that. But India is not far behind, and India is a whole different story and will bring a different energy. And I think those two to be in harmony would change the whole dynamic of the planet. Yeah. And of course, they are not in harmony. They're in competition. So I don't, that's how one would describe it. Yeah. Still battling over territory, land, and all that. But in the earlier times, there was communication between the sages. Even not that long ago, and I see it as, and Tibet is sandwiched in between them. Yes. So it's this whole landmass of India, Tibet, and China. If they can all come into harmony with one another, it would change the whole dynamic on the planet. It really does seem like there needs to be. It will take a global paradigm shift, because we really, I think contemporary societies do have this dominance and hierarchical, competitive, and warlike belief system or cultural system. So it's really about shifting out of shifting the whole thing. And yeah. I work with quite a few younger people in China who are sort of where we were in the US maybe 20 years ago, techies who have gotten fed up with material success and taking up meditation practice, going out to do retreats. And so there's a younger generation of people in their 30s and 40s who are going through a shift in consciousness. Yeah. China very rapidly is going through this materialism. It took the West maybe some decades to go through it. It's all been compressed in China very rapidly. Right. There's this huge middle class now that's grown with buying power to consume. And it seems as if you just have to go through that period. It's like a growth spurt if your teenager wants everything they want, right? Yeah, that's true. And I appreciate what you said about not seeing China as a political entity. And often, when I'm in conversation with people, and they'll be like, say something about China that's, something that's not necessarily positive or something. So, well, that may be more governmental, what something oppressive that's happening isn't necessarily the mindset of the entire people. It's a policy, We would think how we would have wanted people to look at America, right? Not by our government's behavior. I remember during the years of the Iraq War, when I was doing a lot of travel and there was a lot of anger toward America. And the America I see is one of a growing spiritual movement, of a growing meditation movement. So I would always say that's not the America I know. I ended up by saying to people, when they say, "Where are you from?" I always say I'm from New York, So like saying you're from California, right?
Right.
So, because America is a big place.
Yeah.
And there's a certain image of America. But if you sort of describe where you're from within that, it defines it even more. So I would always go around saying that's not the America I know. And I think, so we as Americans know that we should not be mistaken for the political leadership of the moment.
That's right. That's right. That's right. The book takes you, as we've been talking about, across time and even into the time in between lives, where you have this consciousness of coming into incarnation. And there's a beautiful passage that you wrote and that I'd like to read or have you read. But you've brought this across these different incarnations that you've experienced or you have memory of. And it seems to me that this is a really important, the ability to, it's not even necessarily the ability to remember the past lives, although that in and of itself is very significant and there's a lot to learn as you do that, but just having the awareness that this continuation of consciousness exists is something that's missing from our culture. And I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your perspective on the importance of that, or if there is importance, and what it could offer people if they were to consider that as a possibility.
Well, for me, once I've regained a memory, it doesn't leave me. So I am Chinese. I'm Vedic. And of course, I've been many other things, which I talk about in my other books.
Yeah.
Once you, even if you don't have specific memories, once you realize that, how can you be prejudiced? How can you be biased when you realize you've been that?
Right.
You've been everything. You've been at the top of the ladder, at the bottom of the ladder. We've been everything. We've had such a long history. So I think even without knowing the specifics, just acknowledging that you've passed through all the different stages and have experienced so much. They've lived in different cultures and different races and religions, ethnicities, male, female. It changes your whole perspective. And I think for me, since I started writing about my memories, the whole fabric of time has changed. At first it was, oh, you just remember your past life. Well, that's something, but what, 10,000 years ago? 10,000 years ago? Really?
Yeah.
But what is time? It's the creation of the mind. I mean, it's what is time? The same thing in this book happened to me with space. Because, scientists already, many of them, physicists, talk about other dimensions.
Oh, yeah.
So what we call the celestial worlds, we would today call other dimensions, right? There are subtler worlds which the human eye can't pick up on, which the human ear can't pick up on, but they're there and they exist here now.
Right.
You can develop the intuitive ability to perceive those worlds. And they're far vaster than our physical world, and such diversity. There are all kinds of worlds that one can enter, right? Realms, Yeah. And we have a relationship with those places because we live in those places as well as here. And so I was able to peer into those and describe them a little bit more. And then the whole process of taking birth again. And that it's been a preoccupation of mine actually since writing that is can one maintain the consciousness of those places while maintaining the consciousness here? In other words, exist in both places at once, exist in multiple places at once. We know that advanced yogis do that, right? That's omnipresence. they have the consciousness of being at any point where they need to be.
Yeah.
But we can all become that.
Right. Holding that, it's expanding consciousness and holding that consciousness. And it's, you know, and it's part of developing that inner work. Yeah. And it's exciting to think about that possibility. And, you know, one of the things that I'm thinking about having this level of consciousness of a past life, consciousness of the time in between, consciousness of the larger space. You know, Robert Thurman is a friend of mine, and he describes, describes the bardo, which is that life in between,
Right.
as, he says, that's not, you know, that's not the bardo. This is the bardo.
Exactly. This is the bardo.
This is the bardo.
This is the life in between.
Yeah, this is exactly it. Yeah, I want to grab your book, and if it's okay, can I just read a passage? This is it's just so beautiful, and you're transitioning. You're coming back from you're in the in between. And you're describing taking form. And this is, I saw the blueprint of the life I was to take. It would again be in China, where I had recently come from. I would pick up where Mahua left off, and I would complete what Sundari had begun. I felt myself being pulled, drawn into a heavier realm, adopting the density of the atomic world. It was a confinement, a process of assuming limitations, narrowing of perception, and losing the vastness of this light-filled world.
Right. Now, this is relevant because we all fear death, right? It's kind of built into the DNA of the human body to fear death. And I think that, I mean, in writing these books, it's changed my whole relationship with death.
Yes. Yeah.
And I kind of see that as the next frontier for humanity, to understand better what that is. And when you leave the human body, there's an expansion. I mean, you no longer there's consciousness, but the consciousness isn't limited by the physical senses, by your physical encasement. And it changes your sense of identity. You know, most of us just automatically identify with our body. But it's not who we are. And I mean, everybody knows that deep inside.
Right. It makes sense. You know, I mean, I've always, kind of the way I've perceived it is that when we're to be physically manifest, to be matter, to inhabit matter, you know, take form in physical matter. And you describe it here. It's a limiting of the consciousness. It's like we become more dense. Our larger self, our consciousness, our spirit does not.
Right.
But our focus does.
Our focus. It's like you narrow in on the focus. I mean, the reason why we don't remember all our lives is because, I mean, you know, it could be very confusing for people. Sure. It could be very, very confusing. And you would not stay focused on what you're here to do.
That's right.
At a certain point, it becomes very helpful because you realize that just as the past determines your present, you are now determining your future. So you can more consciously shape the future, which is a whole nother topic. But I think this process of confinement, and then of course, it goes the other way around too. When you leave the body, there's this process of expansion.
Right. And what we were talking about before is how much awareness from here can we have of here? And certainly meditation is key to that, and other practices as well, but being able to expand to hold that and to hold that light and to be a vehicle of that realm into this realm.
That's the goal. I mean, I think that's why we're here is to be able to serve, allow that energy, that consciousness to be present here so that we can help uplift this.
Right. A lot of people understand the concept because we're a therapy-filled, gratefully, there's therapies helpful to people world. And so people understand the idea of having patterns, having some pattern that they repeat in their lifetime that they work on. And, one of the ideas to me of the significance of understanding past lives, it's not to preach a gospel or anything, but to say, well, you do that pattern in this lifetime, you're doing it across lifetimes.
Exactly. That's
So-
exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
People think of karma as being, I did an act, it's going to come back to me.
Mhm.
It's all patterns of thinking and
Mhm.
behavior. And, I've been able to trace through many lives a lack of confidence, a lack of a feeling that I have a voice as a woman, which is why I've taken so many lives as a woman to try to work this through.
Mhm.
And this comes up again and again for me. And even in this life, in my Chinese life, as Shu,
Mhm.
she was a poet, but she had no confidence in herself
Mhm.
as a poet, as even as a Taoist,
Mhm.
and she had to struggle with that.
Mhm.
And the story didn't end; the struggle continues.
Right. Well, I picked up on, that was a theme I wanted to mention to you. And it did seem like Shu had made some strides in that area, in developing.
It was interesting because she was forced to, her husband was this famous poet Li who was imprisoned, and she was forced to go defend him.
Mhm.
And that was her having to come out and find her voice, not to defend herself, but in defense of her husband.
Mhm.
And she was able to do it. And so she did. I mean, you do see growth over the several lifetimes.
Mhm.
If you go back to Sundari, and then you see the 2 lives in China that she led before that, and then you see she's much more. And it's the first time she's really doing spiritual practice. And
Right.
the other lives, she had guides and teachers, but she didn't
Mhm.
quite get it. And then she tried and wasn't very successful. But
Mhm.
then she has a Taoist master, and she's able to engage in serious spiritual practice. And I could see for myself that was a turning point. That was the beginning of my spiritual practice, really,
Mhm. Mhm.
of a disciplined practice under the
Mhm.
guidance of a master.
Mhm. And one that you awaken to in each
Yeah.
lifetime helps you to awaken to.
Right.
So interesting. There's you start the book with a story about that, to me represents how kind of the non-ordinary element of reality, these realms that are always operating here, that we can tune into, how it comes into the ordinary physical realm. And that's the story of finding the phoenix in the lamp shop. Can you talk a little about that?
It started off with one of these dream visions that I had
Mhm.
of a marriage between a sun deity and a lunar deity, and I couldn't understand what it meant. And in the dream, I see the deities of the sun, and then in the dream I open my eyes and I see the physical sun, and then I close my eyes and I see the internal sun,
Mhm.
which is a sun of a subtle realm, because in the other dimensions there are suns there too.
Right.
And all of this is very hard for the rational mind.
Mhm.
It's very hard for the rational. Where is this inner world? And over many lifetimes I struggled with those questions.
Mhm.
And so it's not something that the rational mind, there's a limit to what the rational mind can know.
Mhm.
And I think that's just bottom line, there's a limit to what the rational mind
Right.
can achieve. And language and concepts, for years I've been involved in dialogues between yogis and Hindu yogis and Buddhists around the term of God. And I
Mhm.
always say it's language and concept that's creating this perception of difference.
Mhm.
The experience is the same,
Yes.
but language is very divisive. You know, what God might mean to me is not what God means to you.
Exactly.
I don't even use that word anymore because it's so it means so many different things to so many people. Right.
Right.
You know, so you know, and you have all the whole range of what it could mean. You know, a man sitting on a cloud directing things like a movie director, or you know,
right.
or just this primordial consciousness. So
yeah,
I've seen that language and concepts are what's divisive, and only experience is what's uniting. So you put a yogi together and a master together from another, and they're experiencing the same thing.
Right.
So we have to. So this idea of the moon god, what does it mean? The moon god. What does it mean? A sun god. You know.
Right.
It's not easy to explain it with language.
Yeah, you know, I work in a therapeutic modality called depth hypnosis, and when I work with people, you know, it's very experiential, and meditation is very experiential, and working in an, you know, in an altered state, not an altered state with using you know, plants or something to alter the state, although that's another form of altered state. But meditation, different ways of altering consciousness, is how you drop into this larger state we're talking about. Right. And you know, and so, you know, in helping people understand, it's like you must have the experience yourself. You must have the epiphany. The epiphany is the place of realization, and the conscious mind can't go there. The conscious mind can process it when you come back, but when you come back, it can order it for you. But the conscious mind, at least my experience of the conscious mind, is that it thinks it's all there is. it's always kind of in charge, going, well, you know, it's this big, but it's like, hey, I'm the world. But when you can train it to kind of calm down and have the larger experience, then the conscious mind becomes an ally, more of an ally, you know. But if we're only working with the conscious mind to penetrate this larger consciousness, we plateau, and we get stuck. You know,
that's a good way to describe it. The mind can become an ally, but it takes time. For that to happen. And a lot of practice.
You know, and I think also just, you know, I think that, you know, also just encouraging people that there is an experiential element to all of this, you know, to really just allow yourself to have the larger experience and not seek, you know, so many people are like wanting the instruction, wanting the pill, you know, wanting the thing that will.
I think to trust your experiences also.
Yeah.
You know, people have said to me, you know, how do you know these are your lives that you're seeing? And I said to them, I don't. I could be tapping into somebody else's memories, but it doesn't matter to me because I experienced that life.
Right. Well, you know, I work a lot with past life, and I have my own memories, and it's fascinating, and it's always, you know, it's always a teaching. It's always something for me to work on and apply to this lifetime. It's not like, oh, I was, you know, this queen, and you know, no. It's like not past life tourism, you know. It's right. But you know, there's just something to work on, and kind of the way, you know, I think for contemporary people to understand it is just as, you know, maybe it's real and you're having that memory or that experience, or maybe it's a way that your psyche is organizing things for you to experience something that you need to see at a little bit of a distance. Doesn't matter really.
It doesn't matter. I'm not attached.
Yeah.
Having been that person.
So Buddhist of you. Yeah. But, you know, and then where I always kind of get to is the quantum place that you were talking about before, which is like, well, if we're all one, then it's all our collective memory anyway. You know?
Exactly. That's the thing. It's our collective memory. For me, the interesting thing is to see the awakening process and how, but also, well, to me, the big gift is the love. I mean, what I've seen in all of my seeings of the past is these beings of love who are serving selflessly and giving so much, and how love does not die. I mean, essentially, I see when the bright moon rises as a love story. I mean, it's a love that begins in a time where it can't be fulfilled, and it is fulfilled when these two souls are at a more mature state, and then they can have. But she still struggles. I mean, she still struggles in the relationship because everything is struggle. Life is struggle. There'd be no growth without struggle.
That's right. Yeah, it's your relationship to the struggle.
but it's the love, you know, that remains, and I think we can all become conscious of that. You know, I mean, that's what our world is really needing now. Is for more people to be living in a state of in the heart center. More people just be, and love to me is a state of being. It's not I love somebody. It's a state of being. You know, where you're just in loving relationship with everything. To me, that's the solution of the climate crisis, to be in loving relationship with the earth and the trees and the rivers, to be in loving relationship with it all. And that's the message I try to convey in all of my books. Yes.
And clearing the obscurations to that love, and to being able to be in that love.
Yeah. I mean, one has to go through a certain amount of growth in order to be able to tap into that. And for most of us, we tap into it at moments. You know, you have moments where you feel so connected to everything. It's you know, and then we fall. I mean, this is the benefit of meditation. It helps you to stabilize that a little bit, so that you're more often living in that state. And the goal is to be in that state all the time.
Right. Well, I think the book, you know, I think you're very brave in writing the book. Like, I think that there's a way that this is holding a voice for truth, and as you perceive it, and for love, and for, you know, changing the planet in a way. And that it's a very, you know, when you talk about Shu, you know, bringing your voice forward, I think that you really do that with this book. And
you know, it's I never question until I finished a book, and then I step back and say, oh my God, Dena, what have you just done? And after I finished, I thought to myself, you know, I've never seen myself as being anybody famous, thank God. And I've never been famous. I've never been anybody famous. But I was married to this poet who is famous, and is beloved in China even today. The children always cite his poetry. And I thought, here's this American lady now claiming to have been the wife. I mean, not the only wife, he had other wives too. Of this beloved poet. How is that going to look? How is that going to be taken?
Right.
And then I thought, well, it is what it is.
Yeah. And it's so important, you know, and it's so important to have your voice there, because in a way, you know, it gives permission to people who are struggling with the question of past lives, and of, you know, what is the meaning of all of this? I mean, it really offers some insights.
Anybody does introspection. And you can see, I have seen part of myself in every life I see a part of me. In that. So the poet, that woman poet who was never a success, unknown poet, disappeared from history, really. There's not much known about her. I see that poet in me. The book I've just finished now is about Rukmini, the wife of Krishna, and it's told through the eyes of a dancer in ancient Dwarka. I see that dancer. I know I was that dancer. So you it's like compilation of all the past is who we are today. But if you reflect on your life, you see the things that you love. It's not the first time. The people that you are close to, it's not the first time. You know, the people you have trouble with, it's not the first time. So you can tell a lot about your past by looking at your current life. Yes.
And you know, there's beautiful poetry that you've written throughout the book, and which is also a testament to this lifetime that you lived as a poet, and that you said, and you described having studied poetry and writing poetry in this lifetime.
when I was younger. Yes. And from the age of 10 on until I got more
Yeah.
involved in meditation. And
Yeah.
then I sort of moved out of that world. Hadn't written in years and years and years. Suddenly, writing this book, I'm getting up in the middle of the night and writing poetry.
That's great. That's so great. Do you have the book handy? Do you have it right there?
I do have it. Should I get it?
Would you mind?
Yep.
Would you mind reading a poem for us?
Okay.
I would love for you to read the very last poem in the book, Sitting Among the Leaves.
Yes, Sitting Among the Leaves.
Would that be okay? It's just such a beautiful description of this idea we've been talking about of past lives.
Sitting among the leaves. I sit among the leaves of my lives, watching them pile high, each telling its own story, stories I unknowingly cling to. With one breath, I can blow them away and see them dance into the distance. But do I dare let them depart? Do I dare call the winds of awakening to free me so I can finally be who I am?
So beautiful. Really.
Well, at the end, we have to shed all of our lives, and it's, you know, it's a process. After you see it all, you have to shed it all, right?
Let it go.
Let it go.
So what's next for you, Dena?
Well, I've just finished this book that takes place during the lifetime of Krishna in India with Rukmini, who was the rebirth of Sita during the Mahabharata War. And it's interesting because it was a time of transition of a major shift in society, as we're going through a major shift in society. And that will be out in the fall. And then I'll be internally traveling into Tibet.
Yeah.
Well, see, I mean, I already have that. I already know what I'm going to be writing there, and yeah, it's a whole story. It's a saga.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm looking forward to both of those books and having you back to talk about them.
That would be wonderful.
And and just lovely again. Thank you for being here, and just lovely to talk to you and catch up with you and to talk about this wonderful book, The Awakening, When the Bright Moon Rises, The Awakening of Ancient Memories. So
thank you.
Thank you.